Anwen wrapped her arms around her chest against the cold. Even though it was early summer, the mornings in the mountains were still chilly. The straps of her backpack bit into her shoulders as she waited for the others. Part of her wondered if it really had been a good idea to demand she go, though she also knew it was inevitable. The Keda felt certain the other mages, if they still existed, wouldn't come back just because a dragon lord told them it was okay to do so. She knew she wouldn't if it were her. Once more in mortal form, Kern moved to stand by her side on the parapet. His long robes fell to his feet in graceful lines that hinted at silk.
Your mother would be proud of the woman you are becoming,
he said as he gazed out over the city below. Under the guidance of several upper-level mages, the buildings looked more livable. With a few modifications, the path to the mountain lay a bit more open. Pending on circumstances, they debated on changing the overall design, though. Despite that, the work was going on quite well. Unfortunately, with the revenants coming, that threatened to change. But at least it gave them something to do until they had something more definite to go on. Anwen sighed.
I don't even know what kind of woman I'm becoming. Too many things are changing. I'm reeling from moment to moment.
She didn't want to mention the hints of anger she felt deep down where she tried to keep it hidden. It was irrational and potentially dangerous. She'd seen what anger could do and feared it.
I wish I could say it gets better.
Kern smiled.
There will always be something. What matters is how we respond to those changes. And time wears on everything, just as water does. Change is as inevitable as the sun setting in the west.
Looking up in alarm at his tone, Anwen saw an expression on his face she couldn't identify.
What do you mean?
She felt her stomach twist at his words, almost as if they were some kind of omen. Though he had always taken on the appearance of an old man, she'd never seen him look this tired before. His eyes drooped and his shoulders sagged.
I am tired,
the Nurrim confessed.
Soon I will go to my rest. The heart of the mountain calls to me. This battle will likely be my last.
Anwen's eyes misted and she had to wipe them to clear her vision.
You can't mean that.
Images of her mother's lifeless body filled her mind. Next to Margo, Kern was the closest thing she had to a parental figure, even though she didn't know him all that well.
Do not be sad,
Kern soothed as he lifted her chin.
It is the way of things. But do not fret. Just as your mother will always be with you, so will I.
At that moment, Tyler and Walter joined them, each carrying a loaded pack. Kern nodded to each in turn.
Remember the allotted span,
he warned.
We must still have time to plan and strengthen our defenses. I fear they will include resealing the mountain. The revenants must not be allowed inside under any circumstances.
Tyler nodded, his expression solemn.
Of course, a wise one.
He gave the older dragon a half bow before turning to Anwen.
What is the first clue?
Anwen shielded her eyes as she glanced towards the rising sun.
Follow the river Drage towards the ruins of Sorwa. In the lonely temple, your next clue waits.
Pulling out a copy of the aged map, Walter located the city.
That's not on any modern maps,
he commented.
Used to hear stories about that place. Now they say it's nothing but a haunted patch of rock and marsh.
Fastest way down is flying,
Tyler observed. He didn't need the map to tell him where to go. He could see it in his mind, transposing the old over the new.
That or the river.
The Keda shivered at the idea.
I don't suppose your truck's nearby, is it?
She looked at Walter, not liking either of Tyler's options. She'd already drowned once and wasn't keen on the idea of tempting fate once more. Nor was she ready to brave the skies again. The medic shook his head.
It's back in the village. Had a dragon fly me up last night. It was faster that way. And, besides, there's no real road to Old Sorwa. We'd have to abandon it halfway there.
I'll fly us as far as the river,
Tyler decided.
But from there, we should go on foot. Or on the river, as the case may be. I dare not fly us directly there. To be honest, regardless of what I just suggested, most people outside the mountain don't believe in dragons anymore. I'd rather not risk being shot from the sky, if you know what I mean.
Thoughts of her father's murder filled Anwen's mind. She couldn't imagine what would happen if she also lost Tyler. Not that it would matter much. From what she understood, because of their shared soul, what happened to one happened to the other. Anwen nodded, filled with misgivings. She still couldn't get over her intense fear of heights, not even after everything she'd been through.
I'll try not to scream.
Tyler moved back to give himself enough room to transform into his draconic form. Once done, he knelt down so Walter could clamber onto his back. He then turned to Anwen. He could feel her trembling.
Would you rather I carry you in my hand? It might be easier on you.
At Anwen's nod, Tyler scooped her up with one clawed fist and sprang to the cleft of rock over the eternal gate. Being careful to keep her unharmed, he scaled to the peak of the mountain using his other 3 limbs. With a nod from Walter, he launched himself into the air, diving towards the ruins below. Anwen did her best not to scream. She clenched her jaw, closed her eyes tight. The resulting noise sounded like a dying bird on a kamikaze run, but at least she didn't send echoes of fear along the canyons where anyone could hear them. In a matter of minutes, they were soaring over the road through the Draconi Range. Skimming close to the surface of Lake Wyvern, Tyler resisted the desire to do a barrel roll. Even though Walter had a firm hold on his neck ridges, he wasn't sure if the man, let alone Anwen, would appreciate it. The moment Tyler touched down and released Anwen, she ran for the bushes and retched. Once she was finished, she returned to the small clearing near the river where they'd landed. She wiped at her mouth, biting her lip.
Sorry about that.
The exercise left her looking a bit pale, but she knew it would quickly pass. Tyler had returned to mortal form by that time and gave her a sympathetic smile. Though he'd felt her discomfort, he still didn't understand it.
You have nothing to be sorry for.
He felt thankful his connection to her hadn't made him follow suit. Walter finished checking his gear, making sure the pack was fastened in place.
You know, if we're done with all the antics, we should head out.
He reminded. Chastened, Anwen readjusted her pack and fell in line with the others.
How long will this part be?
She wondered out loud, hoping to distract herself from recent events.
About a day.
Tyler replied as he checked the sun's position.
Should be pretty easy going until we reach the valley. Let's get the boat ready.
With that, he went to look for wood suitable for the task. Courtney sighed as she listened to 2 mages complain. Anwen was better at this sort of thing than she was, even though the younger girl was reserved. Leadership was not her cup of tea, and why they'd chosen her to act as surrogate master mage was beyond her. The explanation had been simple enough. Kern showed a great deal of confidence in her abilities, but even with that vote, she still felt disapproval radiating off her companion. Why? Just why on the Green Land had the Nurrim chosen Callum, out of all the dragons, to be her companion in all of this? He'd made his opinion on the matter quite clear. He was no happier about this arrangement than she was. The blonde rubbed at her temple with one hand. The mages in question had presented a petty bickering that she'd rather not deal with, but it was her job to keep the peace among the mages and dragons alike. She had no idea how Anwen did it. If it had been left to her, she would have bashed in their heads long before they'd finished talking.
I'm sorry.
Courtney interrupted their tirade.
I understand you both feel you're going above and beyond what should be expected of you. But have you taken the time to consider that you're not the only ones who feel this way?
That comment brought the 2 mages to an abrupt silence. They exchanged glances with each other. Both were younger than Courtney by about a year, but far more advanced in their craft. And, admittedly, they found it a bit hard to see the older mage as any authority figure, especially not when they knew what kind of person she had been. But the presence of Callum seemed to overshadow them. It quelled any attempts they might have made at trying to throw any proverbial weight around. Yes, they were more advanced, but they were still younger, and they were not the personal friend of the Keda, who was also just as young and inexperienced, or so they'd heard. Courtney let out her breath in a long huff.
Those who have a lot to offer will be asked to put in the greater effort. Our strengths will be used to the best advantage. I don't feel any less inadequate than you do. But what I know is if we don't give it our all, by the time the Revenants come, we're not going to be able to defend ourselves. If you're okay with that, then just go sit in some cave and wait for them. But if you'd rather not just keel over and die, get back down there and do your part and stop wasting my time.
As the 2 mages left, Courtney slumped down in her seat. They'd given her a sort of office from which to work. It was more like a glorified cave, but at least the chairs were comfortable. She'd rather be down in the city helping with the repairs, but Callum insisted she stay in the cavern and learn more of her craft. It was embarrassing to have to learn some of the more basic things from a dragon, especially one who had little patience for her antics. With an effort, she sat up. Callum had not given her much time to get used to the idea of stepping in for Anwen before crowding her with lessons. It almost felt like he was taking out his ire for all mages on her, and she didn't like it.
If you ever expect to learn your craft, you must keep pushing your limitations.
Callum's gruff tone reprimanded her more than his words. Behind him, the long line of complaints had finally ended. At least he'd opted to transform to mortal form, making it easier to look him in the eye.
Now that the distraction is gone, try the exercise again.
Courtney pursed her lip, resisting the urge to make a snide comment. Instead, she focused her attention on listening. Her task was simple: transform the small crystal he'd brought her. The swell of celestial music filled her mind as she concentrated on the task at hand once more. Anwen clung to the gunwale of the dragon-fashioned canoe. Though Tyler had done most of the work, he'd insisted she help to improve her skills. So far, the boat hadn't leaked, though she wondered if it was only a matter of time before it did. All the same, she felt more than a little uncomfortable sitting at the prow, but Tyler thought it best. It reminded her of some kind of masthead. The paddle Walter manned dipped in and out of the water in rhythm with Tyler's. So far, they hadn't encountered any major setbacks. The water ran swiftly, so they didn't need to row, but the Dragon Lord insisted. Time was never on their side, as past experiences had taught them.
How fast you reckon we're going?
Walter wondered. The water ran a decent pace, but their rowing seemed to double it. Trees and bushes raced by. If he had to guess, he'd say they were going the general speed of a car on a country highway. Looking at the passing landscape, then the sun overhead, Tyler frowned.
Not fast enough. Since we don't know how many clues they left behind, speed is our best ally.
Anwen grit her teeth. They were going more than fast enough for her taste, and none of them had a life jacket on either, something she hesitated to point out. The others knew how to swim. She didn't.
If you could see me now.
She let out a sigh, wondering yet again why she hadn't taken those swimming lessons when they'd been offered. Some hours had passed since they'd taken to the water. The sun continued to climb up in the sky. The occasional overhanging branches gave the only shade as the river wound around. It changed subtly as they continued on their trek. Some parts were more mountainous, while others remained friendlier to the eye.
Listen to the river,
Tyler said in Anwen's mind.
Look at the trees. Remember how it felt when we skimmed across the lake.
Anwen knew he was trying to help, but she wished he'd stop. The whole mage thing didn't come with the same ease to her as it did to Courtney. The other mage was probably helping in the ruined city right about now, and chances were good she had something to show for the efforts put in. This exercise seemed pointless with little reward. She just couldn't do it, and didn't know why he pushed her so hard to try. Tyler guessed at her thoughts and pulled his oar in, setting it on the boat's ribs.
You're thinking too hard,
he told her.
Remember, it's not something you can force. You've already seen matter at its smallest level. It's all the same building blocks. Now, you just need to learn how to hear it. Everything has a sound, a melody if you will. Once you can hear that melody, you can ask it to change as you need it to. Just listen.
Anwen closed her eyes with a heavy sigh. Her mom had told her something similar before she died, but thinking about that wouldn't help her get past this lesson. The grief was far too fresh and she didn't want to deal with it. Maybe she was hardwired differently, like being stuck on an AM radio station instead of FM or something.
Remember,
Margo had told her.
the music of the universe does not sound like the music you are used to hearing, but it is no less beautiful. Each voice sings in harmony with the others. That's the natural order of things. It is only discordant when things were out of place or forced.
Trying to block out all other senses, Anwen listened. The water rushed forward. The sound reminded her of clinking glass, and underneath it, there was a lower growl as the boat cut through it under the surface. She almost thought the boat was speaking. Excuse me, it seemed to say. An occasional bird chirped overhead. Hello, hello. The water gurgled against the stony bed. Don't mind me. Coming through. Walter lifted his paddle from the water. With Tyler's oar not plying in rhythm with his, there was no point in using it, except to keep them away from potential hazards. He glanced up towards where Tyler seemed to stare, realizing he was focusing on Anwen.
Something wrong?
Tyler admonished as he continued to look at the Kata. It wasn't so much looking at her as it was helping her focus through their shared connection. The veteran stared at Anwen, realizing she'd let go of the gunwale. She was now swaying with the flow of the water.
What's she doing?
Walter whispered, leaning towards Tyler. Part of him wanted to reach over in case she leaned too far to one side. Tyler didn't allow his attention to deviate from the swaying figure at the front of their small boat.
She's listening,
he replied in a hushed tone. Anwen felt more than heard a rumbling underneath as the rocks around them shifted. Something had changed. She turned her head to one side, trying to find the shift in natural rhythm, eyes still firmly closed. Up ahead, a natural gorge had formed through the course of time. The rock's sides slanted down towards the water. A few scraggly bushes clung to the surface as shale skittered down and around them. Anwen tilted her chin towards the left side as they slipped through the mouth of the carved break. The rumbling came deep, but now she felt it centered higher up. Something was falling, and if she focused even more, she could hear what it was saying. Coming down, coming down. The Dragon Lord stiffened. He looked upwards at the cliff walls. It was faint, but he could see where the weathered rock was cracking. A sudden urging filled him as he realized what that meant.
Rock slide!
He called out, ready to propel them to safety. But before he could so much as cast a spell, the boat shot forward as though an arrow from a bow. Walter fell back and almost went over the side, but Tyler grabbed him in the nick of time. Looking ahead, the medic realized Anwen hadn't been thrown back by the force. Instead, she had grabbed the prow and was leaning forward as if she really was some kind of figurehead. With her eyes still closed, Anwen urged the water around them to move faster. He pushed the boat forward at an alarming speed. Coming through, coming through. Her hair whipped in the wind as loose earth and rock cascaded down around them. The displaced water only made them go faster as the canoe dodged stone and shore, as if it could see the obstacles around it. They somehow managed to stay a few seconds ahead of the falling debris. Tyler leaned forward as the spray wet his face. Further ahead, he sensed another change as the water surged down a sheer drop-off he'd forgotten about. Crap! But before he could even think about taking over, they shot over the falls. Once over the roiling water's lip, they sort of hovered over the drop below.
What the?
Walter began as he gingerly sat up. The boat seemed stationary, despite the water churning around it. Looking to either side, he saw the mud darken, the water frothed downward around them, like water entering a drain. But the frothing water didn't sweep them away. It took him another moment to realize a geyser held them up like a pillar. The dirty water rushed around them as if they didn't exist. Slowly, the canoe began to descend, moving forward until it rested once more on the river. The current pushed them up against the shore, a good dozen yards or more from the falls, and lodged them on the sand. Walter leaped forward to catch Anwen, aware of Tyler's mirrored fatigue. He reached her in time and settled her against the gunwale, her body all but limp in his arms. With an effort of will, Tyler closed the mental connection he shared with her and moved to cradle her in his arms.
Quite the feat for a novice.
He smiled with affection, fatigue echoing in his eyes. Blinking in surprise, Walter gave Anwen a closer look.
That was all her?
It somehow didn't seem possible. But then again, he knew who her mother was and decided he shouldn't be too surprised. Margo had been a force to be reckoned with. The dragon nodded as he settled Anwen against his chest.
She sensed the landslide a second before I did. That burst of power, and the control.
He trailed off, at a loss for words. Anwen's lips turned up a little while she slept in Tyler's arms. She instinctively curled her legs around his body so that her knees came up against his hip. Walter gave a low whistle.
If she can do that with as little training as she's got? Huh. Wow. I'm not sure I want to know how she'll be at full strength.
Tyler pushed a damp strand of hair from Anwen's face.
Mind-boggling, isn't it?
He couldn't help but smile down at her still form. It was quite the feat for anyone, especially a normal run-of-the-mill mage. Perhaps it was a good thing she wasn't ordinary, he mused. Her double heritage was more than enough to overwhelm a person, even the most skilled of individuals. Not bothering to answer Tyler's rhetorical question, Walter reached for his pack. Thankfully, they'd secured it in the middle of the boat before the rather wild ride.
So, should we set up camp now, or wait?
He looked skyward, noting the sun had passed its zenith and was now heading down once more.
Wait.
Tyler answered as he settled Anwen against the other packs so he could move.
Anwen saved us a good chunk of time. We can press on and reach the lake near Sora before nightfall. Then we can look for the ruins in the morning.
Walter removed his water bottle and took a sip.
Works for me.
He glanced at the sleeping girl.
No more waterfalls, though. Right? I think she's done more than her share for the day.
No more waterfalls.
Tyler confirmed.
Help me push us back into the river?
He picked up his oar and Walter did the same. Soon they were back on the water, but at a much gentler pace.